we as a group kind of try to divide and conquer. You know, if there's, you know, there's several sessions going on at one time and we can choose which ones we go to. We try to break up and go to different sessions, and they were all very interesting. A lot are put on by other schools, so just the networking and the ideas that we come away with, I think by the end of the conference, Brian was like, whoa, because we were like, well, we could do this, and what about this, and why aren't we doing this, and maybe this is an idea. So we've since relaxed a little bit, but a lot of good ideas. As Doug mentioned, one idea would be to some school districts have a student representative that sits on their board. They're not a voting member, but they can participate and maybe give a new perspective. So that's something we've kind of talked about. Other ways that we can get students involved in our meetings and, you know, understand what's going on a daily basis. We talked about even having someone to represent us leading the Pledge of Allegiance and such. So a lot of good ideas. I think, you know, we can all probably write down some of the thoughts that we had taken away and share them with the people that would benefit. I know they have a trade show. There's a lot of groups that are represented at the trade show, and you know, from school furniture to you know, lunch programs and all that. So it's kind of fun. We can kind of give ideas and information to pass them along to the respective parties. So, and I don't know if anyone else wanted to add anything.
Yes to what they said, but also I wanted to thank Debbie because she really does a lot for us to help coordinate this effort to get, you know, as many school board members at this conference as possible. And like I said, it is beneficial from a knowledge gaining standpoint, but also we get to network with other school boards. We get a chance to communicate with each other, because outside the school board meetings, we don't really communicate that often. And so it gives us some time to hear different presentations, share what we've learned, share our ideas, and I think that makes us stronger as a board. But lots of good sessions, and I think one thing that a lot of the sessions I went to talked about is just communication skills, and how we need to really value our communication skills with everything that we've been through. And you know, a big piece of that is our ability to listen and understand where people are coming from. So it was a great few days in Des Moines, so I enjoyed it.
Great. Mr. Street, you had led a little bit of a session, didn't you? And how did that go?
Went really well. You know, looking back, and it was a great opportunity. I spoke with I spoke with David Ford from our ADA here in town. And then there's also a gentleman from Woodbine, superintendent, that was part of that as well, with Andrew Stewart from our ADA. Our topic centered around postgraduate student success. Our data that we have is where kids go after post-graduation. And then also we talked about the project we did a number of years ago where Mike was the high school principal at the time. We had looked at the National Clearinghouse data, and we were seeing that basically in the state of Iowa, at our 2-year programs where kids were going there, 25% of them had to retake a math class, which means they're getting no credit for it, just having to retake it. Now 25% equated to 20 kids, but obviously we know there was more above and beyond that had to retake a class. So we looked at the coursework we were offering, what it could look like, how to set students up for success, and that was really our conversation. It was really about the partnership between the AEA and us and what we all do to help kids every day. So.
And then we had Mr. Welch, I believe, right?
He did.
And what other individual?
So Mr. Welch, Forest Grove principal, spoke with Aaron Mauer from our AEA here also, and they talked about the collaboration partnership there and helping kids explore and learn at a higher level through some of the projects that they have been doing at Forest Grove.
Great. So we had good representation. And then I went to 2 sessions, one on communication, as Ms. Kunkel talked about, and that was really informative as well on what are the best ways to communicate with the public, how to better conduct meetings, those sorts of things. And then I also went to the legislative update, where there was a state rep and a state senator who were both there, and they were talking about what's going to be upcoming in the next legislative legislative session. And they mentioned that the three priorities are gonna be the voucher program, as we all kind of knew already. That's gonna be revisited. In addition, looking at transparency. And then the last thing, after some prompting, was teacher recruitment and retention. So that's the other thing that they said is gonna be hopefully on the legislative agenda for this next year. So it was very informative. Again, it was really good to network. It was great to talk to other board members in other areas and then get other ideas. So thanks again, Deb, as well, for all the work that you put into getting this registered and getting a place for us to stay. We really appreciate that.
And a thank you to the four of you for attending this year as well, so
Okay.
greatly appreciate it.
Good. Okay, so we have an update on that. Now, our next order of business is the election of officers. And so, as you know, we just had, every November, we have to elect both president and vice president for the following year. So that is the meeting today. And so what we normally do is we take a piece of paper and we do president first and then vice president. And so you just have to put the name of who you want to be president from this board for this next year. And then you need to put the person who you want to be president and then put down, you have to sign your name as well on that. So, we all know that. So we'll do president first.
And just fold it up and
And then pass it to, Mr. Glenfield usually collects them. We'll pass to Gaz.
As Mike is collecting these, just so you are aware, Tracy Rivera is ill this evening, unable to be here, so she contacted Debbie and Mike and gave them their votes. And also, Jody was unable to be here tonight as well, so she had emailed both of them their. So Mike will have them in account.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. All right, and now we will do vice president. So if you would take your same, a different piece of paper and put down who'd look for vice president and then sign your name to it, that would be great.
Did you see this?
Mrs. Barkley, unanimous?
Thank you.
So now the oath of office, we will do president first and then vice president.
Jill Barkley, do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge to the best of your ability the duties of the office of President, Board of Education in the Pleasant Valley Community School District as now and hereafter required by law?
Hello? Okay. All right, Ms. Buckman, Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that you will faithfully and impartially, to the best of your ability, discharge the duties of the office of Vice President, Board of Education in the Pleasant Valley Community School District as now and hereafter required by law? And then there is one more that I need to do to Miss Damon. So Deborah Damon, do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that you will faithfully and impartially, to the best of your ability, discharge the duties of the office of Secretary, Board of Education, Pleasant Valley Community School District in the County of Scott, Iowa, as now and hereafter required by law?
Yes.
Congratulations. And then there's one more that Debbie will do to Kelly Hatler for being the treasurer of the Board of Education. So she will do that probably this next week. All right. Now moving on, we have the consent agenda. And so if there are there any questions on this evening's consent agenda? If not, I will take a motion.
I move the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Mr. Camisher, to approve this evening's consent agenda as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, approval of bills. General fund.
I move the general fund warrants be issued in total amount of $551,989.99 and payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Camisher, second by Mr. Ayers, that the general fund warrants be issued and the payment invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nutrition fund.
I move nutrition fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $99,650.89 and payment of invoices presented.
Second?
Motion by Ms. Kunkel, second by Ms. Bachman, that the nutrition fund warrants be issued and the payment invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Elementary Junior High Activity Fund.
I move that elementary junior high activity fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $625.43 and payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Bachman, second by Mr. Ayers, that the Elementary Junior High Activity Fund warrants be issued and the payment invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? High School Activity Fund.
I move that high school activity fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $74,672.53 and payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Camisher, second by Ms. Kunkel, that the High School Activity Fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Management Fund.
I move that management fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $10,950 and payment of invoices presented.
Second?
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Ms. Bachman, that the Management Fund warrants be issued and the payment invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Capital Projects Fund.
I move that capital project fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $627,214.92 and payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Brockman, second by Mr. Ayers, that the Capital Project Fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Pepple Fund.
I move that Pepple Fund warrants be issued in a total amount of $26,119.97 and payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Mr. Camisher, that the Pepple Fund warrants be issued and the payment invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Debt Service Fund.
I move the debt service fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $184,125 and payment of invoices presented.
Second?
Motion by Ms. Kunkel, second by Ms. Brockman, that the Debt Service Fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Internal Service Fund.
I move that internal service fund warrants 6442 to 6446 be issued in the total amount of $514,013.45 and payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Mr. Canwisher, second by Ms. Kunkel, the internal service fund warrants 6442 through 6446 be issued and the payment invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And finally, trust fund.
Move that trust fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $225.63 and payment of invoice presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Mr. Canwisher, that the trust fund warrants be issued and the payment invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Now, going on to old business, 2023 to 2024 school calendar. We will read this out last time, and now we are here as well to look at it again.
So as you look at the school calendar, Beth has placed on the screen here for us to see. Since talking to you back in October, I believe it was, we've taken it to our PBA IPBS group, and we've gone through it twice, took it to PTA presidents as well. We've talked about a lot of these dates, again, very similar structurally speaking to what we see this year. A couple things we're excited about as you look at the beginning of the year, August 8th through the 11th. Tony and Jill will lead us through new teacher training during that time. And what's nice about this year is we'll have those 3 days, the 14th, 15th, and 16th for new teachers before they have to report on the 17th. So they'll have some extra time there to do some different things and to get prepared. But all staff will return on the 17th. We begin school on the 23rd. You can once again see our first and third early out schedule like we are doing this year. We have our fall break in October with the 27th and the 30th. November, just like this year, the 22nd, the Wednesday prior to Thanksgiving, will be off. And then in December, we will have our first day of break starting on the 22nd, returning on January 3rd. And Beth, there you go, thank you. On Martin Luther King Day, on the 16th, I believe it is, 15th, that will be a no school, no teacher day. It's a holiday on that one there. February, we will have our break there at the end of the end of the second term for elementary, midterm for secondary. But again, the 16th, if we have a snow day prior to February 9th, we will use the 16th as a snow day where staff, be an early out day where staff would then stay till 5 o'clock for professional development. Spring break, again, you can see it's the 11th through the 15th. We will take that holiday on the 29th of March, will be off. Because of that, we talked with our teachers regarding the 26th of April as a day off in the last 2 months of school. We talked about using that as a snow day, and we are not going to, just because it's getting so late in the year, not knowing if we're gonna have one, and parents may plan to go somewhere that weekend. So we'll stay with our traditional one in February, because the April one only happens about once every 7 years, once every 5 years. So we'll just keep that as a clean day, nothing required on that day. You can see graduation would be on the 26th, I believe it is, Memorial Day weekend. Our last day of school is slated for the 4th of June. So again, very similar. If you guys approve this tonight, we'll start getting this on our website. So a lot of times you see parents trying to plan trips already a year in advance because of work schedules, but that would be our calendar for next year. I believe when talking to Bettendorf, North Scott, and Davenport, Scott Community College, like I've said before, I believe we will all continue to land this year on spring break being the same. I know a couple districts are looking at maybe moving spring break to the last week of March in the future. So we will see how that continues to play out in terms of conversations, but I believe we'll all be on the same page for the next school year.
Was there any discussion on January 3rd that's a free stay back, but that's an early out?
You know, not really, because we've had that occur in the past. We just, when it's the first Wednesday, we just stay with our typical pattern so parents know that we'll have an early out that day for consistency.
Anybody else have any questions regarding the schedule? Does it look okay to everybody? Okay with it? Okay. Then I need to open this up for a public hearing. So, for public hearing, does anybody have any comments on the 2024 school calendar? If not, hearing is closed, and then I will take a motion.
I move the board approve the hours-based 2023-24 calendars as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Ms. Kunkel, that the board approve the hours-based 2023-2024 calendars as presented. Roll call vote, please, Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Ayers, Mrs. Brockman.
Yes.
Mr. Camusher.
Yes.
Mrs. Kunkel.
Yes.
Dr. Wonderly.
Yes. Okay, moving into new business, we have, the partial roof replacement, project, and, our bids did, come in for that. So, let's see here, Mr. Struce?
So going through the last one of our last board meetings, when Leland was here, he went through and showed the zones that we're working on at the junior high and the high school for roof replacement coming this summer. We got our bids back in. There were 4 people that came for that bid process. Jim Geesey was the lowest at $760,555. Remember, our original and thought was gonna be around $800,000, so you can see that on the screen that Beth is showing right now. Overall, we were very excited because they were very close together in pricing, which is kind of nice to see. They're very competitive with each other, and we're hoping, because of what we're seeing now in the market, we're hoping we have opening bids tomorrow for junior high addition in Forest Grove, and we're hoping that we're seeing a market that's pretty competitive, as these were rather close. Remember, sometimes we do roofs and they can be $100,000 off from each other. So a little tightness here, which we appreciated. In terms of Jim Geesey, they're the ones who did the junior high, or that's right, but Bridgeview roof this last time, did a great job. We're very conscientious, cleaned up very well. So we're hoping again for good results on these 2 projects. So the recommendation would be Jim Geesey.
Have any questions? You know, being at the IASB meeting, there was a lot of, a lot of people in the exhibit hall that were representing roof companies. And so I discussed, with a few of them about, the fact that we're gonna be replacing some of our roofs. And so I'm assuming that when Leland looks through all of these, that he's making sure that the roof material is material that will, withstand a lot of the environment that we're in right now, because they were talking about how there's only a couple types of material that's really good for like Iowa roofs. I'm assuming that he knows that already. Is that correct?
Well, so when we go out for bid, we always work with IMEG, our engineers, and so they're the ones who kind of drive the work that we do.
Okay.
They put the specs together, what it has to look like and what the roof needs to be. And that's, so when these bids are coming in, they're all bidding on the same thing. Mike maybe be more of a roof expert than myself. Maybe you'd have some ideas there, but,
Mine were all pitch roofs, not flat roofs.
you know, we put, typically it is, when you get up there on the deck, then you have your insulation board, and you have the rolled roofing, the rubberized system
Right.
membrane on top.
And most of them, we're talking about this rubberized system.
Yeah, it's a membrane that's put up there, rather durable, unless you start, if you leave a messy roof, is what I'd say, if you leave nails and things like that on the roof, they get stepped on, that causes a lot of problems, so you hope to clean it. We do have a couple of roofs that are still, have rock, you know, tar with the rock, I believe it's tar is what I would call that. So we have a few that are still, they last as well, but, hopefully get some years out of these because they're expensive.
Right, exactly. And assuming that the warranties, like, that they have on the roofs is like a standard warranty that happens with these types of commercial projects.
Yeah, I can't speak to what that is offhand, but again, they're all bidding the same warranty as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And IMEC looks at the details then
They
to
do.
make sure.
They drive that whole decision,
Okay.
yes. Or the whole process, I should say, that decision.
Okay. And of note is the fact that the bid did come in lower than our budget, which is always good news. Any other questions at all? If not, then I'll open this up for a public hearing. So, opening this up for a public hearing, does anybody have any questions or concerns regarding the partial roof replacement project for the Pleasant Valley High School and Pleasant Valley Junior High School? Seeing none, public hearing is closed, and now I will take a motion.
I move the board accept the low bid of $760,555 from Jim Geesey Commercial Roofing for the Pleasant Valley High School and Pleasant Valley Junior High partial roof replacement project.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Camusher, second by Mr. Ayers, that the board accept the low bid of $760,555 from Jim Geesey Commercial Roofing for the Pleasant Valley High School and Pleasant Valley Junior High partial roof replacement project. Roll call vote, please, Ms. Stamen.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Brockman?
Yes.
Mr. Canwisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Kunkel?
Yes.
Dr. Wonderly?
Yes. Okay, our next, new business is new vehicle purchase recommendation. Mr. Strus.
So as you know, Leland is not unable to be here tonight, but he wrote a recommend, kind of your supporting materials, there's information there regarding the vehicle purchase for our fleet, for our maintenance staff. We did hire someone last year, we have not purchased a new vehicle for them. As you know, we do have a couple of our trucks that are aging in the 2008, 2009. You also saw in your minutes that we replaced a bed in one of our trucks for about $10,000. So we try to fix these and use them as much as possible. Typically what you will see is the miles are relatively lower, but they're starting to age out from rust and different issues because just the miles we put on is a lot less. But with that said, the reason we're going tonight for this bid on this pickup is because Ford only offers a certain window of time when you can order, and the window happens to be this upcoming month. When you put your order in, we are hoping to have it delivered sometime in that March time frame. They'll have it built by then. Remember, we're still waiting on a van as well. It just takes forever. So the window opened up and we needed a vehicle. So he went out to 4 companies for bids, and you notice that Lindquist was the only one who returned one. The cost was, list price is $50,000, but we're getting it for $44,987 instead. So hope to get it sometime between March and September. Cross our fingers. But again, with the window that drove the timeline to this to get the discount that they were offering at this time.
Are there any questions?
There was budget for this already for next year,
Correct, yep, in his budget, yes.
and we're at or below.
Yes,
Yep.
it's definitely within the budget.
If not, if not, any other questions, I will take a motion.
Move the board accept the low bid of $44,987 from Lindquist Ford for a 2023 Ford F-350 Super Duty pickup truck.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Ms. Brockman, that the board accept the low bid of $44,987 from Lindquist Ford for a 2023 Ford F-350 Super Duty pickup truck. Roll call vote, please. Ms. Stamen.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Brockman?
Yes.
Mr. Canwisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Kunkel?
Yes.
Dr. Wonderly?
It's a pretty large span from March to September. Let's hope that we're on the earlier side. But with this day and age, I mean, it can be that long. In fact, I think how long did we wait for the last one that we got? It was several months.
It was, and like our van, when did we order the van? You guys remember?
Yeah,
It's been over a year.
Yeah.
Over a year.
Yeah,
I was
plus.
gonna ask if I remember the one, because I don't remember that vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was right before that. Yeah,
I asked them to take a picture of it, send it to me, so I can see if he actually got it.
and I assume the money doesn't go until we get the car.
Right.
The money is not
Correct.
for the,
No.
but you haven't spent that on anything else. Okay.
It's this thing.
Okay, great. All right, our next order of business is the board policy review for the Department of Education, Mr. Strus and Mr. Zimmer. You will find actually a hard copy next to you regarding all the new board policies here. What you will find in red is the new information and how it's going to be changed, assuming it gets approved. And what's crossed out is how it used to be. There are some new sections as well, and this is our first kind of look at it right now, but it's quite, hefty packet here that we've gone through.
Yes. So I think it's a good summary, Nikhil, on that information. So right now, when you look at the policies you have in front of us, there are 16 board policies. We have our audit with the Department of Education coming up in December. So what happened was, the Department of Education in the last year has come forward and said there's certain board policies we want to make sure that we have in our board policy book. And so what IASB does is, Iowa School Board Association, they then write the policy to match what the DE is looking for. The DE is asking us to send these to them in our desk audit in December so that they can account that we have done this. That's part of what our audit is, different things that we are supposed to be doing from the DE standpoint. So This may take a little bit of time, but I'll kind of walk you through some of these. I know you had a chance to see them for the first time. But if you have questions as we go through, please feel free to ask. Mickey is also here tonight if you have any questions that she can answer too. She's had a chance to go through these as well. Some of them will be very quick, some will be a little more time, so I'll try to give you a summary of each one as we go through these, and Beth will scroll through these as we go through them. And again, I'm not going to read these word for word, but just kind of summarize. When you leave tonight, look at them again for our December board meeting. The professional development one, for the most part, when you read the black scratched out below, the theory behind that and what is up in red is very similar. What I would say is this: it was just easier to say, let's just use IASB's policy for professional development. You would note that the second paragraph down below is very similar to what you see above in terms of requests for attendance participation. So really, philosophically speaking, very similar. It's really the superintendent or designee provides for professional development or approves professional development, which the designee in this case would typically be Tony, Jill, or Mike. PD is sent to them, they approve it. So that was how that works. So as you read through that, Doug had sent a couple typos there, at least changes, and we will put those in place on that policy as well. And if you do have questions, please ask. Otherwise, I'll kind of keep rolling through these as we go. So, employee expression, this is one that we did not have in our board policy. It is a brand new policy based upon the Department of Education and also then IASB writing this for the state of Iowa. As you go through, I'll kind of summarize what it really talks about is the First Amendment rights, professional or personal for staff and what that looks like, you know, definitely being different than what a First Amendment right looks like for a student in that regard. But then also talks about the third paragraph, social media and what that looks like for an employee, whether it's in school or outside of school, and what would happen if something was seen as maybe disruptive and what that could voice in terms of that. Up in the opening paragraph, one thing I did add from IASB, did not have it this time. There's been a lot of conversations about speech, and it is in the fourth line. Speech may also apply to the classroom decoration, posters, or displays. So that is part of speech as well, that we've seen in our area conversations taking place there. So again, brand new policy, just putting this in place in terms of what expression looks like for any employee in the district. The next one should be child abuse. And as you look at this one here, really, again, when you look at the black, you know, it's basically our policy. The red really just talks about differences in changes to the policy and when we have to do our trainings. So in the second paragraph, it used to be 48 hours for reporting. Now it's 24 hours that you will get the information back in a written report. We used to have training every 5 years. Now it's 3 years instead. Down below in the red, you'll note that anyone before July 19 can still stay at the 5 years, but once their 5 years is up, everybody has to go back to 3 years there, and that's for child abuse and dependent care that we are going through that process, which we've been doing all the time for our licenses. So nothing new, just some difference in times and years. School calendar, school day, it is easier at this time. We have not officially started going through our entire 600 policy. This is one we can elect to keep together or separate when we get to that point. Right now I've combined them into the same school calendar, school day, otherwise we'd change our entire table of contents in every board policy at this point. So just putting these together because they go together. Really what it comes down to in school day is how we have to report to the DE every spring and every fall our school day. So it's kind of the definition of what meets a school day. That means the 6 hours per day in school. It can be your professional development, your conference time, your early outs, and also weather. You know, what happens when it comes to weather. So that's those 4 paragraphs really outline the definition of what a school day is to make sure we're meeting our 1,080 hours or 180 days. The next one, curriculum development. Again, overall, you will see everything in black is our current policy, which just outlines our curriculum development policy, where we review curriculum roughly every 6 years through the process that we use. On page 1 that you see there that Beth is showing right now, if you scroll just a little bit further, you can see most of the red. They have just added what's called a curricular or a framework, and I would call this the goals. When you start to write curriculum, these are things you should think about in terms of, as you just read through those, you can kind of see, what's the recent research, what's being said out there, expert advice, it talks about our standards, our benchmarks, grade level expectations, ensure that it's aligned to improvement goals. So it's kind of like your matrix to start when you start writing curriculum. Are we hitting those benchmarks? So that's really the procedural aspect of overall goals there. The rest of it is our process for writing curriculum that you see on the next 2 pages. Curriculum implementation. Again, this one here, if you read it, you'll note it's exactly the same as what we have, but they added 2 bullet points, and you can see those in 2 in red. Ensure the curriculum framework, which was just talked about in the previous policy, complies with applicable laws, and then provide professional development to staff to support effective curriculum implementation. So again, this goes back to the previous, where they added that information. Curriculum evaluation. Again, how do we evaluate? What does this look like? Again, you will note, for the most part, it is exactly the same as our current policy. The first paragraph you can see in red. The first sentence really aligns with the struck out part above. So the struck out part, as Dr. Wagley had mentioned, was our original policy. Striking that out, it's really covered in the red section there. Again, it talks about the curriculum framework, and then talks about the bullet point you see down below really gets at the 3 performance levels, and those align to our state assessment, state testing, and also when looking at standards and benchmarks and what we're trying to do. Are kids meeting? Are they advanced, or are they not yet proficient? Those are kind of the 3 levels that we use when talking about students' levels. And then again, ensure the last bullet, ensure curriculum complies with applicable laws, was another one that was added to that list. Again, otherwise, same as our current policy. I think the next one might be technology. Is that what you have, Beth, on yours? Yep. Again, exactly the same as ours, but because of updating and the way technology changes, they just added in electronic devices besides multimedia, computers, electronic devices, and other technologies, that we utilize those in our curriculum. So whatever an electronic device would be, from readers to phones, whatever it might be. Okay, the next one, instructional materials procedure. When you look at this one here, I really look at this as kind of the overarching broad statement policy, and then you'll note that there's a separate policy for selection, and there's a separate one for objection also, which we'll get to. So when you note everything in black again is the same. When you look at the red section, it's very similar to what we had before. I would say when you look at when you read through those again, it's the same process as you note above in the selection process there. Inspection just mentions that parents and other members of the school community can view instructional materials, library materials, which is a process we have in place already for that to take place. I would also say they may view the second paragraph under inspection. Instructional library materials may be viewed on school district premise during regular school hours. That's a process we use already at this time.
Could we just add that the reality of what's coming up as more things become digital, whether they're digital textbooks or the like, a lot of times that will be assigned just to a student, so then however we manifest an LMS system, it's going to be on there. So we're still trying to make sure that we've got printed material, so because a community member would not, if they don't have a student in the system, they're not going to be able to look at that. So then it's like, okay, well, how do you get that in a hard copy version so that somebody can come in and look at that? Whereas if you're the parent of a student, you say, pull up your class, I want to see what you're doing. there you go, you got it right there. So I'm just explaining that the transparency piece, as we start moving in that direction, we're still trying to work through some of these electronic nuances to make sure that we've got stuff available. If you say it's here, we gotta make sure it's available, so.
So they're basically named licenses for,
Yeah, yes.
and so you couldn't, every public person that wanted to see it, you have to buy a named license if you want to share an electronic version. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, and Director Canwisher, what I say is right now, if you think about it from a dollars and cents standpoint, book companies they want their money. And so, if they're printing a lot of books, like for elementary or secondary across the country, we're finding they're a lot more palatable to, yeah, we'll give you both an online and you can still get a printed version if you wanted to. But when we start getting to some of the college textbooks, which are niche, like an astronomy book or something like that, what I ran into is, you're only gonna get it electronic. They're not printing copies, because they can't make money off the printed one. So that's where I'm kind of learning as we go through on some of these courses. The higher level the courses go, the more niche the book is, and the less they're printing, and the more they're going to, yep, that's just gonna be electronic. Like, okay.
And as we go to more LMS systems and Canvas, it's also who has rights to that information, because there could be, you know, confidential information on them as well. So I think that's where we'll probably see a change in this policy in the next couple of years, but it's just not there yet.
Is that part of the negotiation with these LMSs? I mean, we can't be the only one with the problem.
No, I mean, yeah, and there's just no policy in terms of transparency yet that's come out.
Right.
That could be coming,
Mhm.
but we'll see.
Well,
So you're good.
That's something that we need to share with our legislators, so that they know that before they pass a policy, that they need to look at all this stuff to help direct
How do we
school
share it?
districts. You know, this is a problem, if you wanna, you guys can make a law on this, but this is a problem we're gonna have. And so before you make a law on this, make sure you work that out first.
And fund it.
And exactly, and fund it adequately, that's very true. I have a question regarding, on the last, paragraph on the, objection, which is parents or guardians of students enrolled in the district have the ability to request that their student not be able to check out certain library materials. Can you please explain, how will the district implement that?
Yes, so if you could, right now, if you were to, Beth, you don't have to scroll to this piece, but as with your paper copy that you have, if you go back to the, which one it is, there's a form, I'll start with that.
603.8.
Yes, exactly. So it is, from this page, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 pages back. It should read in top, request to prohibit a student from checking out specific library materials. This is a brand new form. What this would be from a process, as you read that form, it says that a parent can request or prohibit a student from checking out certain library materials to be submitted to the superintendent. Please complete one form per student. They would request, who's requesting it, the name of their child, book or other printed material to prohibit student from checking out. So they could list the author, the title of the book. They would then give this to myself or the building principal. It would then go to the teacher librarian. We're talking about library books. In our Follett system or library system, it would then be entered in there. And we believe then you have to monitor it from that point. That's what that statement is saying there.
So, I guess my question is, in the Follett system, that's in a computerized system?
It is, yep.
So
Checkout
in there,
system.
in there, it'll recognize if a student wants, through maybe their ID, that it'll come up as an alert saying, oh, they can't check this out, is that correct?
That's what we're hoping. I mean, that's what we've had that conversation.
Or is the library gonna have to manually go and just say one of these pieces of paper before a kid checks out anything to make sure that they're not on the list?
I ran this to our librarian, I was like, one elementary, and anyway, you're concerned about how to manage it.
That's my question, is how is it gonna be implemented?
And so there was not only, there's managing the piece, which you asked me, but I don't have an answer for you right now. And the second thing at the secondary is, well, what do I do with an 18-year-old? Is a parent gonna go in and tell an 18-year-old you can't see the report? So you start running into a little bit different situation high school students, so we don't have answers about that either.
Okay, so that's to be determined. Okay.
And like any situation there with this 18-year-old, and that's a conversation between the child and the parent, and you know, how we facilitate that and what that may look like, if they both have different views. So we have to work through that, and that's where Mickey helps us.
Mickey, legally, an 18-year-old can
Legally,
make,
an 18-year-old can make their own decisions,
Correct.
and frankly, they can prohibit the parents from having access to the records at all.
that's what I say, that, because when they get into college, they can look at their own grades, they're not obligated to tell their parents any of those things.
Correct.
So the moment it turns 18, doesn't matter what the policy is, so do we need to put that into our policy?
Parents, I mean,
At the age
parents
of
are minors.
18,
Yeah.
I think
it's
it's
up to the student?
typically, I would say how we handle a situation when those things come up, it's a conversation that we facilitate, because you may have some 18-year-olds that may never even ask for it now. You know, so do you write the policy for the one situation, or do you put it, I mean, that's always the question mark. So, we don't have anything, we have not gone down that path before in what we do.
So if you wanna sort of take what Nikki suggested, or just offer this revision, parents or guardians of minor students would cover an 18-year-old, and go from the policy perspective.
Good.
I mean, the reality is, I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tony or Mike, we don't know of a lot of objections within the libraries, correct? There's a
Just
few,
definitely not aware.
handful.
Well, and if we have a, I mean, if we don't put that in, how it's written right now, we're not problematic in that standpoint, because from what you're saying is they come, there's an issue, we have a meeting and we discuss it with them and try to find a way to, not have it be such a forceful situation. It's a conversation we can have with some understanding and.
I mean, really, what it would come down to us is if they're saying this, parents saying this, so we can say, your child's 18, you have a conversation with them about what you'd like to do and then let us know. Because it's not really us. If the student's saying no, we can't stop that by law.
Yeah.
And that's again where you're not trying to set an argument between a parent and the child. You're not trying to do that. You're saying, listen, it's kind of like, give you an example, divorce situations that we have sometimes. We never want to pit a child between two parents. So how do we facilitate that to make them to realize this conversation has to be had? You decide, you let us know. Out of respect.
And I think the more likely time that this would occur is a parent would put in an objection when they're like a freshman, and then the child will turn 18 during that time when they're in high school and they decide they want to check out whatever book that the parents objected to. And it may, for those parents, might be a non-issue by the time they're 18 versus when they're 14. But that's probably more likely, and I don't know, have you thought about, do they have to do it every year, or is once they put it in, it's forever? Just throwing that out there, Mike. You're welcome.
From a management standpoint, I think once would probably be the most,
It
the
would be
easiest.
Probably,
way.
just,
Yes.
I mean, and that might be why it's not listed in there.
Yeah.
So if a child, if this goes into effect in junior high, will it be transferred to high school then, with that child?
That's what we'll have to work through. We'll have to get those answers.
And that would be, it would be strongly favorable to be able to enter this into Destiny. Destiny is
Right.
what we use, it's a Follett product. And so if we could enter that, and then if a parent chose to change their decision at any juncture. And we also have to figure out, is that gonna talk nicely down the road with the learning, with an LMS, too.
But Destiny is an LMS product, right?
It's a library management system, not a learning management system, yeah. Both LMSs.
Okay.
So,
I do kind of like his thing though, just, I mean, I'm not saying it can't be a conversation, but putting in minor and then you put in parentheses under 18, that way people at least when they look at the policy, they'll know that that's what it is. But we could help facilitate the conversation as you're mentioning. But in the end, legally, there's not much that we can do.
it's something with grades and all those things.
And then we'll have to
Budget
work through
too.
the expiration piece as well.
Yeah.
Are you wanting that to be in the policy or not?
No, I just added here what you're talking about right now, parents and guardians, of minors under 18,
Mhm.
we could,
What about the expiration piece?
let us work through that between now and our next meeting. Let us see what we can find out.
The only thing when you bring it up caused me to pause, is I was trying to think of 504s, we review those annually, every year. A physician's excuse on a phys ed, you have to update that annually, it's just not a rule, you gotta bring a new one in. That's what just caused me, I'm thinking in my mind, what things do we have right now
That's annual.
that just go on in perpetuity until whenever, I'm pausing. Trying to think of those things that we do.
And the library books at the elementary will not be the same ones at the junior high, and then they will not be the same ones at the high school. So, that's the reality. There'll be some crossover at each level, but not all.
Unless they interloan it,
Exactly, which is of course,
a possibility.
Which they can do through Destiny.
Yes,
Correct.
that's
They
the
can.
piece right
Yep.
there, they
That's-
add on, that's the piece.
That way, look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, that gives us some good things to think about, keep processing that between now and our next meeting too. The next one that we have on here would be a form that right now, if something is going to be put up for a concern or a challenge that's brought forth to us, this is the form that is currently used. If you scroll down to page 2 of this, and I'll refer to it as questions number 6 and number 7.
Here.
You got it. Yep. So when you look at number 6 that is up there right now, that is a new one that is not on our current form. And it reads, should the opinion of an additional expert in the field be considered, yes or no? And if yes, please list specific suggestions. So this is coming from the person who has voiced a concern. Do they have information to share or ideas to share with us if we're not going to use something? And the second one, really, number 7, is very similar to what we had before. Our old ones read this. What other materials do you recommend using for this instructional purpose? When you read this one, it just takes up a level. Do you recommend other materials which you consider to be of equal or superior quality for the purpose intended? That is what that one would read. So again, if filling this out, do you have a recommendation? If we're not going to use X book or X library material from an instructional standpoint, what other suggestion would you have for the committee to consider? So that is new in this new rendition. So it just gives them a voice of what they might be seeing as something different.
7 is a yes/no question, so if that's not your intent, and I'm not sure it should be, you should probably revise it. It says do you, right?
Which one?
Number
7,
7, do
in
you
other words,
recommend
needs to
other
be yes,
materials,
and
so it's a
then
yes or no question.
If yes, please list. Come like we did in
Oh.
6.
Got it.
Come
Yes.
like we did in 6.
Yep.
And my question about 6 is a talking head on the news an expert?
So, good question. How I refer to that is when you look at all the selection of curriculum materials, and we'll get to that in a minute, you would go back to looking at, is that a quality piece of literature or book that we would use? You go back to the experts in that, which would be, our licensed employees, is how it reads here. We'd run it through that process to see if it's something we'd want to consider.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Good question. Okay, the next one on here is the instructions to the reconsideration committee. Oh, sorry.
Well, so there's 8, which was to reconsideration of the second was, do you wish to make an oral presentation to the review committee?
Yep.
Is that not a requirement then?
So, correct, it would not be. So they can submit this to us. If yes, please contact the superintendent. If they say no, then we just look at it and still bring it forward potentially. And they may give us a written statement, wouldn't have to be verbally done at the meeting. So it says oral presentation, doesn't have to be oral. Instructions to the reconsideration committee. Going through this one again, this is similar to some things that we have. in our current one. The things that I would say in the first opening paragraph, you'll see a section actually in black. That was struck out of the IASB one. Doesn't really change the definition. Because really the last sentence there opens that back up to the meeting or some Iowa open meetings laws. It's open forum. The second paragraph, when you read that one there, the summary of that would be, it's an overview to the committee as to the purpose of what their role is. The next one, the third one, really gets at creating, review or understand the selection process that you're gonna go through. The fourth paragraph really talks about the climate for meaningful discussion, making sure we have a productive climate of everyone respecting each other when going through the reconsideration process. The next one, where it's just one sentence, the committee may, at its discretion, hear an oral presentation from the complainant to the committee to expand or elaborate on the complaint. That was a new sentence, similar to what the next one was, but just use IASBs. And then the last paragraph there just talks about, again, creating a calm, non-volatile environment. Yes.
Can I just say something for the benefit of our guests? All of these policies are included in the supporting documents on the website, so it's all out there if you want to
Yep.
read it word for word.
And then the one in the last paragraph, the committee chairperson will instruct the secretary to convene the committee's recommendation. That would actually read the board secretary, would be the person who would be attending at the meeting to listen in.
I left that on.
There's a paragraph that starts with, the committee may at its discretion hear an oral presentation from the complainant to the committee to expand and elaborate on the complaint. But the form we just finished talking about, there's a checkbox that says, yes, I wanna talk to the committee.
Maybe no, I don't,
Yeah,
or no, I
so
don't.
if they say yes, are we saying that the committee could decide not to hear them anyway?
No, I don't. I would, Nikki?
Brian and I actually talked about this earlier today, because we're gonna get to a later policy that I think is a little bit in conflict with this, we need to decide. Is this going to be an open forum with three, I think the last time we did this, the complainant and, just the complainant got a significant amount of time, I think they got 5 or 10 minutes. And then anybody else that wanted to speak on the issue had the 3 minutes, which is traditional. And then I think the complainant even got to come back and give a rebuttal, no? Okay. So, that was not really, that's the process that has been followed up until this. The rule is, you don't have to let anybody speak if you don't want to. The committee can just meet like you all are and talk about everything that is submitted to you in writing. I do think that it's a little bit in conflict. Either, if it's going to be discretionary for the committee, I think on that question you should put, the committee will decide whether you'll be allowed to speak or something to that effect. But you do need to decide whether or not you're gonna let everybody speak, or only let the complainant speak, or let the complainant and one person in support of it speak. Actually, I'm wrong, the complainant spoke and then the librarian that had selected in that case, the library book, but if it's an instructional material, it could be somebody in the math curriculum or whatever, about why we're using this math textbook versus something else. And they got to speak for longer and answering questions that anybody had. And then the others was just kind of similar to the open forum that you guys always have at the board meetings. So I think you just need to decide which is the right way. If it's gonna be discretionary, it's gonna be discretionary, and then it needs to be discretionary throughout it from the committee standpoint. But understand that is changing the process from what it has been up until now, in the 2 rare instances over the course of 20 years where these have come up.
So Mickey, from the IASB conference, I spent a lot of time in open meeting, open records sessions to make sure I got a handle on this. So I wanna repeat what I think I understand and have you correct anything. We are required by law to have an open meeting. What that means is a meeting that's open to the public to see. Is that true?
I disagree with that,
Okay.
based upon what the Supreme Court has said from a 2005 case. the Iowa Public Information Board, which has been created since then when you look at this, the specific language, and we're talking about advisory committees and advisory boards, it talks about those should be open meeting in the statute. The Iowa Supreme Court in 2005 interpreted that to say, however, if they're advisory, they're not deliberating and making policy, therefore that is not a meeting. This is a meeting because you're deliberating and making decisions. So there is kind of a conflict, I think. I don't know what the Supreme Court, there's been the 2005 decision, and then there was a 2009 Court of Appeals decision that pretty much adopted that for advisory committees. And in those cases, those advisory committees were mostly board members, and the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals said, they're just making recommendations to the board. You can reject or not. There wasn't a quorum. Because there's not a quorum, it's not a meeting. So that's just, I mean, I'm just telling you what the conflict is. Who knows? Every single board out there is struggling with this issue. And who knows? Somebody's gonna have to take it to the Iowa Supreme Court, because it's now been 17 years since, we have a completely different Supreme Court, so who knows what they'll do with it. And I would say, based upon, the politics of 2005 versus the politics of now, openness is probably much more talked about in government now than it was in 2005. So there might be just kind of a difference of opinion and interpretation of that.
So, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, actually, the distinction I was gonna make was between open meeting and open forum. There's legal difference between the two, or is it just the same thing, really?
I mean, an open meeting is something that must be open, it must have an agenda, you must post it 24 hours ahead. We followed all of that with this committee. There were some other things that came up for a reason why they went into closed session, but I don't know that it's a meeting. There was only one board, Brett was there. Brett was the only one that was there. So does that make a meeting, having one board member? So anytime he goes to a PTA meeting, does that make it a meeting? I don't think so. That's kind of the debate.
Okay.
So if we go back one page, the thing to think about with what we're talking about right now, trying to keep this succinct in what we do right there on number 8. Again, let's just go through number 8. Do you wish to make an oral presentation to the review committee? Let's say they check yes. When you read yes in part B, be prepared at this time to indicate the approximate length of time you present will require, although this is no guarantee that you'll be allowed to present to the committee or that you will get your requested amount of time. Again, it says, it goes back to the written as may happen, may not happen. I can't sit here and say right now as to why the may not would be there. I don't know. Again, when I look back at the last couple of years and out of respect, I think in trying to create an environment where it's conducive to hearing people's concerns, I think it's best, as Mickey has said, probably to listen to the concerns. If there's a concern that's brought up or an issue that's brought forth, then we have to figure out how we handle it at that time. But I think it's best to let people share their thoughts. I don't know if you scratch this and then if you flip to the next page when it says in that paragraph you brought up, the committee may at its discretion hear an oral presentation from the complainant to the committee to expand and elaborate. If we're gonna write it that we wanna be consistent through the next couple policies, that's what's said, but it does leave it open to interpretation of what that might look like. Now, does that give us opportunity to stop taking, let's say something were to happen and we're done. We are not taking any more input, then you could stop it at that point, which may eliminate someone from being able to speak, and then you go into deliberation at that time. And that might be a reason to stop.
Or let's say you have 10 people or 15 people that are, working with the same book. You have all of them speak or not?
Yeah.
Especially if it's the same thing. So you may want, let's see, here are 3 of them, for instance, then you may say, okay, if there's something new, then we're going to hear anything more. Which is why maybe on this you may say, if asked, would you be willing to make an oral presentation with the committee? And then go on to say that how much time or whatever, and then we have to limit the time.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to put in here how many minutes or not, or even put down. I don't know if we should even
I mean,
put
we
that
can
part
put
there.
5 minutes in there. What'd you say, Mike?
Well, to me, the sentence that kind of jumps out is the most critical component of the reconsideration process is the establishment and maintenance of the committee's credibility in the community. Credibility in the community. Even having gone through what we went through, I still stand by the right thing of people being able to come up and address the committee. And I followed Dr. Rose, that 3-minute piece, I thought that was a good amount of time to do that. We got through 16 or 18 people that spoke. What I was thinking about in the sentence that we're struggling with is maybe that if requested, and I'm referencing the reconsideration, question 8, maybe that sentence would say, if requested, the committee will hear an oral presentation from the complainant. Takes the may out, takes that out, and because to me, if the complainant doesn't wanna make an oral presentation and we're just gonna evaluate on the written submittal, okay. I don't know that I would necessarily go into an open, or have, it would be an open meeting to discuss it, but I don't know. The committee could decide then, if the complainant's not even gonna make a presentation.
So just start by saying, if the complainant requests an oral presentation, the committee will hear. Something of that
I'm just
nature.
getting it
I
started, I'm
feel
just
like
trying
at
to
its discretion, because I think it's hard to predict what may come up, and I think it's good for us to have that
Mhm.
little caveat in there.
I agree.
But I do like starting it that way, and I think we are covered. I mean, it is consistent between at its discretion, and then it says there is no guarantee that you'll be allowed to present to the committee. I like leaving it open-ended with the minutes as well, because the onus is really on the person, I feel, that is bringing it up to the board. If you wanna bring, or not to the board, you're bringing it up to the committee for reconsideration, and, it's hard to say how many minutes someone will need to present their case. They may need very few, they may need a lot, but we then have, or whoever's on the committee has the discretion, you know, if they say 120 minutes, we have the discretion to say, I understand that, however, under of time, can you please make it such and such a minute? I think it just gives some flexibility for a conversation and for them not to feel pressured to put their statement into a certain time limit, given you don't know the book that's gonna be brought up, or the situation, or factors that may be involved. I think it's nice to have some room, to explore these things a little bit further, both for the person bringing it up and for us, or whoever's on the committee to discuss.
Let's keep that thought in mind when moving forward to see how the rest of these read then, okay? So that would take care of the instructions. The next one is just give you an example. Documentation is always important. So Mike or myself would send to the last one, we kept it informed about how things were transpiring. This is just a mock letter that we would use to anyone recognizing your concern and identify the next steps in the process. It's just a form letter that we can send to document we understand and here's what's gonna happen. We just didn't have that before we created our own. The next one is the one we talked about, which we'll continue, that's the library materials. We'll do some more checking, get feedback on that for you for our next meeting. The next one is the selection one, and this is probably really the largest one in terms of some question marks that we'll work through along with the next one. The next two policies are probably the biggest ones. First of all, just as you read through this one, our opening piece was very general. You'll note that some of the things that are crossed off really lie in the first two. It goes back to, I think, a question Doug had asked about, or, you know, who has control of decision making? It's the board, but the board delegates it to professionally trained and licensed employees of the school system when it comes to selection of materials. So that's listed there. You can see who's involved in selection of materials listed at that point. Responsibility, you can see that it goes through about the ad hoc committee. If you form an ad hoc committee to select items, what that would look like. On the next page, this statement that you would read, I would clarify this as if you have a committee that's going to start looking at new materials, you would share this as kind of a guiding statement of what you should be looking for or thinking about when you go to select your materials in the process. So it's just given to the committee members, whoever those committee members might be. The next part, part 2, is what we had previously. You'll note that the next part on the procedures for selection under A, as you read through that, that is really goals and objectives what we should follow when selecting the materials. So as you read those, what are things we should be thinking about when selecting the materials? Just general statements, again, objectives. When you look at part B, on the next page, again, looking at, again, the selection process, things to think about, things to look for. On this one here, Catherine had sent an email about number 4, so 3B34, providing abundant recognition of minority groups and women by showing them frequently in positions of leadership and authority. That's one of the things when we're selecting curriculum or materials, are we looking at that? The question is that Catherine had was abundant and frequently are pretty broad terms, and how do you quantify that when going through? You know, and the question is, I think what they're really getting at is making sure that that is a priority in the work that you are doing when selecting materials that you're looking for, giving kids in your classroom the opportunity to see leaders in that position. That's huge. No matter what minority group we have across the board. So if you leave abundant and frequently in there, it just emphasizes the importance of why you are doing it. Can you quantify it? Probably not. But if you take those words out, does it drop some of the emphasis on what's going in there? Great, it was a great question. Again, you can't quantify it, but you're pushing people to make sure, hey, this is important, that kids see this. So maybe process that. We'll leave them in there for right now, but if you see something different, let us know. Part C, I would call this the rubric. The next 7 points is kind of a rubric or criteria when selecting the materials. Again, you can see it, author's qualifications, you know, what is the reliability, all those things that when you're going through, they should guide your conversation. And these are things that teachers could have with them, might be part of their rubric to walk them through. And even the no nonsense under 2G, cost. Cost is an issue. So it really looks at everything. And then part E leads you into, we do at times eliminate materials in our classroom because of the age or because of the content or whatever it might be. And we have a process, it's listed there, 603.8B in terms of weeding library materials. We always try to keep a certain collection date in our libraries. All right, the second to last one now. This one here, again, there are some similarities to ours, but when you look at ours, it's much shorter, and it's almost easier just to say, let's work from IASB's policy. So with that said, the opening paragraph, when it talks about materials, that aligns perfectly what we talked about back in 603.8E2. You don't have to look at that right now, but again, it talks about school employees being the ones who help with the selection process. So again, there's alignment there. Number 1 and number 2 are the same as what we currently have. 2A is the same. Part of 2B is, minus the last paragraph. And here's my question on 2A. This reads how we have it right now, okay? Is this how the world plays out? Probably not. Give you an example. And Mickey and I have talked about this. If a parent has a concern regarding something, they may come to me first, or they may go to Mike first. Our first response is go to the most immediate level, which is the classroom teacher. So let's say the parent addresses the classroom teacher, and they want to challenge something. The policy reads that the teacher would say, hey, go to school board policy X and fill out this form. Or go see the building principal and have them give you the form. You know, one of those things. I just don't see our teachers saying, here's the form, or go online and get the form. We can leave it as it's written, or we have to revise this to read more to the point of visit with your teacher. If you want to challenge something or you have a concern, you want to file a complaint, see your building principal, who will then give you the information. That's the reality of the process.
I mean, I think in order for you to be complete and have it be with board policy, explaining what you just said is probably a better way of doing it, so people know. And that way, each time a new teacher comes, they're going to teach them, but the principal should all know that this is the process.
Right.
And that they can go into the principal and get that form. And that way, you're not, and there won't be any loopholes.
Let me give you an example that takes it out of this realm. Let's say it's a bullying and harassment situation. Our first response is, have you talked to the classroom teacher to see what's going on? It may not even be bullying and harassment. It could just be a conflict that the teacher can resolve with the students. But if the parent says there's bullying and harassment, then the teacher's gonna say, you probably wanna visit with the principal. The principal then walks them through and they say bullying and harassment. Well, here's board policy 100. If you'd like to fill that out, please do so. Get it to us in X number of days. I'd never hear of a teacher saying, here's board policy on bullying and harassment. The teacher goes and tells the principal. I would see this being comparable to that. But that's not how it's written. It's not currently how our board policy is today. So we can recraft that one for next time, if you'd like to see it that way. Okay. So, all right, we'll take care of that. The next one's request for reconsideration. Pretty comparable to what we have right now. B2, it reads, office will keep on hand and make available the request for reconsideration form. We don't really keep it on hand, but on hand just means it's on our website. We print a copy off, we give it to them, so on hand is probably fine. The next one, 5, 6, 7, 8, all is about the timeline. That's just protocol. That's your timelines you can see there. Number 10, you will note again, who is on this reconsideration committee?
I have a question first.
Yep, you bet.
So in 5, it says the superintendent will convene a reconsideration committee within 2 weeks of receiving the reconsideration form. And then it says the committee will make the recommendation to the superintendent within 5 school days of the meeting. But it doesn't say what is the timeline between getting a reconsideration committee assembled to when they will meet to give the recommendation to the superintendent, so that we have that 5 days to give to the recommendation to the superintendent. It just says that within 2 weeks a committee will be formed, but that doesn't say how long before you get an answer. So do you need to have that specified?
So let's walk through that. So the number 5 says if a concern comes in, then I, or would turn over to Mike or whomever, within 2 weeks to receive the recommendation, we'd form that committee.
So yes, you have 2 weeks to
2
form
weeks.
the committee.
Yep.
But it doesn't say, once a committee is formed, when does the committee have to meet and come up with a recommendation to give, so that you will have
Yep.
that Cause you have to be given a recommendation within 5 school days of their meeting. But it doesn't say when the meeting has to occur, after the committee
Well,
is
so let's
convened.
go through, the word convenes a consideration, the superintendent will convene, does that mean within 2 weeks, they will convene that committee?
In other words, the committee has to meet within 2 weeks, is that what you're saying there?
That's how I would read that right now.
I'd probably read it that way, but I can envision a time where that's not gonna happen.
So
And
let me
as I
give you a
say-
great example, so let's pause for a second, go to the next page, Beth, if you can turn us to, on the next page, F and G. The reason why I'm diverting to F and G is the following. I feel like this portion needs to be revised a little bit as well, and here's why. The committee will receive the complaint consideration, which is F. Not a problem. Let's say we're gonna do this, we convene the committee ahead of time. We find our 7 people. We give them the form of the concern by the person, not a problem. The next one is, the committee will determine its agenda for the meeting, which may include the following: distribution of copies of the complete record, the form, yes. Number 3, distribution of reputable, professional, prepared reviews of the challenge instructional materials, and distribution of copies of the challenge instructional materials available. When I read that right now, it's like saying you're coming to the meeting, I'm giving you the materials. So going back to the 2 weeks, if it is a book, I believe one of the best things we did that Mike had everybody do was read the book.
Exactly.
Okay, you may not be able to read that book within 2 weeks.
That's exactly it, that's the point.
correct.
Or get 8 copies of it.
Or get 8 copies.
Yes,
So, I think you're right, we changed the 2-week window to what that says, we'll have to figure that out. But then we also changed F and G to say, ahead of the committee meeting, the members will be given the following.
and what, it says 2 weeks there, right? You have 2 weeks to convene, meaning, well, what if you get the committee and they can't find a common date for everybody to convene in 2 weeks? I mean, who's putting the 2 weeks in there? Can we expand it to a month or something like that? Because people are busy, and if you're dealing with 7 or 8 people, you can't get everybody's schedule all aligned.
Or December.
Huh?
Yeah, what if the objection comes in
Yeah, what if it's in December?
18th?
Huh?
What if the objection comes in December 18th?
Exactly. Exactly.
So whatever time you pick, I was just thinking, you could say upon completion of this G section, then sort of the clock can start, and maybe it's 30 days, but that way you've got all of the prereqs out of the way.
So Debbie also said the superintendent will assemble a reconstruction committee within 2 weeks. So if I get the report, that gives us 2 weeks to get the committee together. And I think the question is, what's that next reasonable amount of time to allow the committee members to do their due diligence to understand what's being asked?
And it depends, what if it's a book that's 400 pages?
I would say within a 2-week window would be probably reasonable.
2 week to,
Mike, how much time did you give them this time?
I'd have to go back and look.
I remember it was difficult to find a
I don't
date.
remember. Yeah, date was time, but I know that as soon as we got it, I ordered the book right away.
it was in the spring sometime.
Yeah.
Because I remember, because, you know, people were looking towards, like, some people had seniors, and there was a lot of senior events going on, so they're like, how am I gonna get all this stuff done? Reading this and go with all my kids' events that are going on, because it's a busier time for some of them. And so you have all those things going on as well.
And what if it's summer?
Yeah,
I'm just throwing that out there. You've got teachers that aren't even on.
So do you say an approved upon date?
Yeah, I
Meaning-
gotta think, we've gotta find, I mean, I think you wanna convene it with all due, you know, whatever, but what if a request for review comes in June 15th? Number one, your teachers aren't on contract, and number two, you're gonna talk to the principal and he's gonna say, oh, go get Joey as your student, but you can't find Joey because Joey's on summer vacation with his family. Just a thought, I mean, maybe we make this as long as school is in session, that you're gonna convene within 2 weeks, just a thought.
mhm.
Because the same thing happens if a request comes in like December 18th. Nobody will have time between December 18th and January 5th or whenever those 2 weeks are up to meet, guaranteed.
when do new materials seem to come in? Cause my worry about waiting until school's in session is, if somebody wants to reconsider, they don't want it in the library when the kids show up to school, so, you know, be worried about that.
Well, then they can put an objection in and say, don't let my kid check the book out.
Yeah,
I mean, if it's curriculum material, I mean, if it's the math textbook, I mean, you can't change it that fast anyway, because you've got all your licenses and everything else. If it's actual curriculum, instructional materials, it can't happen that fast anyway.
So if we go with 5, the superintendent will assemble, or will put together, I mean, that's really assemble, is different than convene. And then we have to figure out what 5.5 would be. 5.5 being, when is the meeting date, the open meeting gonna take place?
Yeah, I think we say something, we'll do a number, we'll probably renumber, we'll say number 6, that after, maybe we move that, whatever that number was below, G 1 through 4, maybe that'll move up.
Right.
And then, you know, they'll be provided this, after they've received all of this material, a meeting will be convened within 2 weeks of then, I don't know.
Could
Yeah.
you change the
Can't say a
language?
reasonable timeframe?
Could you change the language to a set amount of school calendar days to ensure that way if it was during a break, then it would be
Within
20 school
14
calendar days.
school calendar days.
Can we leave it
Or
vague
school.
to say reasonable timeframe?
Yeah, that's a yeah.
Or,
Can we leave it vague?
Or
Or
you
is it
could
good if
say,
it's vague?
you know, we're going to assemble it within 2 weeks of receipt of the reconsideration form as long as school is in session.
Or 2 weeks from the items in G being provided. Once the committee receives those items and a date is selected upon.
So in other words, at that meeting then, 2 weeks later, you will want a decision made?
So,
Because if you're wanting a decision made, 2 weeks is not enough time.
so you have the 2 weeks to get the committee together. Committee gets all their materials. That amount of time is it 2 weeks or longer for them to
It needs to be
review?
longer. We're not gonna get people to do this.
No.
It needs to be longer.
I mean, if we go
I mean,
3 weeks,
Brett, how long did it take you to read the book?
Oh, it took at least 3 weeks. I mean,
Do you
Dr.
remember how
Lundberg,
long
you were on
it
the,
was
you were on the,
I know
committee.
that.
How long did it take you to read the book? Well, you're probably a fast reader, but.
Well, it wouldn't have taken me very long to read the book. It takes me a while to get time to read the book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
but I will say this, I did the book on tape, it was 6 hours.
I did both.
So, I would
And
feel
that's just,
comfortable.
that's just one book, and there might be other material that they have to go through, correct?
Potentially. If we say 3 weeks, remember, if it takes us 2 weeks, we're now pushing 5 weeks out, which is almost 2 months. So he's gotta be cautious on totality of time also.
maybe we don't need to set that floor, maybe we set the ceiling, like, up to X number of days, but as.
But remember, I understand the 5 weeks because you have to assemble the team, I understand that. But that's much different than once the team is assembled, what they have to do. So the first 2 weeks is really, you know, like, if, you know, you were to ask a student, and the other thing is, we're gonna have some students on this, so they have, but if they have finals and they have other things going on, now you're putting this on them as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many scenarios
I
here.
mean, we can what if this to death.
That's what I'm saying, what if we
So-
just said reasonable time frame? What if we just said reasonable time frame?
Not to exceed blank.
Yeah, not to exceed. And I think, I mean, also, we don't, if we needed to cut back on something, I don't know if we need 2 weeks for you to assemble
Right.
a committee. I mean, if we're worried about, you know, if that was 1 week, that would help shorten that a little bit, but.
Right, I think a
Up.
week for you is a hard time, is
I
hard.
mean, again, up to 2 weeks, up to,
Yeah, I mean, the
4
reality
weeks.
is, this isn't, like, these are, it's one thing to assign the teacher, you know, you have access to them. And I think you went, as I recall, we go to the principal, okay, we wanna go somebody on the PTA, who would be good, 2 people that don't know each other pretty well, you know, you look at things, you have a cross-section of people. I mean, there are, and sometimes these people are gone, maybe that's who you want, and I'm just throwing it out there, we can what if, I agree, we can what if it to death, but, and I think it depends on the material. This book, I did not read the book, but my understanding, it wasn't super easy to read. I mean, it wasn't long, was it 300 pages?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the long book.
But it
It wasn't that long
really-
ago.
I mean,
You know, versus, I think the last time, Mike, that we went through this 17 or 18 years ago, it was an elementary level book. So that is a difference, reviewing something like that versus a high school level book, because if this book was a 14 or 15 and above book.
So
And what if
let's-
it is the math textbook or the history textbook? I don't know.
So let us process this, but up to 2 weeks for the first part, maybe up to 3 or 4 weeks for the second part. And the other thing I'd wanna do is check with IASB and see if we're bound by these timelines, or if we have flexibility. I don't know what you feel.
I feel like you have flexibility. I mean, this is, I'm sure they thought about this, but they hadn't think about what happens if it's in the summertime?
Yeah,
Well, and I mean, I just want, if there's a reconsideration all this time, we wanna make sure it's been adequately looked at and
Agreed.
investigated. So if you rush it along, you may not get necessarily the most valid outcome that you would want because people will rush for time.
Even if we put in policy how long it takes, presumably we could get a case and we're like, nope, that's not valid, but we should make a motion, make it longer for that case and move on. So, maybe it's not really long.
Just to give you a timeline on the calendar, the part I don't have without going back and pulling the binder is what the date was when we received the complaint. I think it was in March.
I have
But it looks to me like it was approximately a month, and I say that because on Friday, April 8th, I met with, part of the folks that agreed to be on the committee, which meant back up, it had to go through PTA selection. You guys voted here, or, asked for volunteer, that was a board meeting ahead of that. Then we had to go to Spartan Assembly and ask them to get a couple volunteers to be on the student portion of it. And then I wasn't able to meet with everybody. I came up on Sunday, April 10th, and I met with another member to go over what was going on. And then we met on the hearing itself. I mean, this was really fast track. It
April
was on
29th.
Friday, April 29th.
Yeah.
It came in on Wednesday, March 23rd.
So it took about 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And Wednesday, March 23rd was when the
Yeah,
complaint.
thank you.
Yeah,
So I had the rest of it on, and yeah, it was, and I thought we were moving along pretty fast.
So if we went with up to 2 weeks for the first part, up to 4 weeks for the next part, that might be reasonable.
Yeah.
Up to,
Or not to exceed or something like that.
yeah.
I like the not to exceed.
All right, let us put that in there. And then going back to the other portion, under G, that 1, 2, 3, and 4, that could be put underneath number 5,
Yeah.
saying that we're convening them and they would receive this information.
When you use the not to exceed language, are we taking into consideration the school days or during the school year element?
I think it should.
Up to 4 weeks.
We could say something somewhere saying these timeframes are all assuming that school is in session, they're not on an extensive break. Somewhere in there, I don't know where, but that's just my thought. But really, there's two, summer and then winter break that are long.
Maybe what we do is you put in parentheses, timelines may be extended due to the time of the year or something of that
Yeah.
nature.
If it's finals week, for example.
Correct.
Yeah,
Based upon school
Just
calendar.
call in session school days and then session school weeks or whatever.
All right, let us work through that piece. All right. Under 10A, again, this is 8 members, 7 voting, 1 non-voting to keep it so it's not a 4-4 swing. You would note that, again, in theory, okay, this is designated by the superintendent, but really given to, here's the people that be on it. A director of education, student services, then the non-voting chairperson, 1 licensed school employee representing the curricular material being reviewed, whether it's social studies, English, whatever it is, you'd have a content person there. 1 teacher librarian who's not from the level of the curricular decision being made. 2 parent teacher members,
So it shouldn't it should be 2 parent members.